Martha Calloway didn't cry when they laughed at her. She just gripped that worn leather satchel tighter, lifted her chin, and walked straight into the heat of Broken Horn Ranch, while every man on that property stood back and waited for her to fail. Nobody offered a hand. Nobody said her name right. And Ethan Rourke, the man who needed her most, looked at her like she was the final proof that God had abandoned him. If you've ever been underestimated, subscribe right now. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels. The stagecoach hit the rut so hard that Martha Calloway's satchel flew off the seat and landed in the straw at her feet. She didn't curse. She didn't grab for it in a panic. She just looked down at it the way she looked at most problems, steady, patient, already calculating the best way forward. Outside the window, Texas was burning the way it always burned in July. The sky had gone the color of old bone, and the sun hammered down on a land that hadn't seen decent rain in 11 weeks. Martha knew this because she'd asked. She'd written 3 letters before accepting this position, one to the county land office, one to a man named Harlan, who used to work Broken Horn before he quit, and one to a water surveyor in Abilene who owed her a favor. By the time the coach stopped in front of the ranch's main gate, she already knew more about this property than most men who'd worked it for years. What she didn't know yet was how much they were going to hate her for it. The driver climbed down and opened the door without looking at her. She gathered her satchel, accepted no help, and stepped out into the heat. The ground was cracked under her boots. The air smelled like dry grass and old smoke. And standing in a loose half-circle near the fence post, 4 ranch hands, 2 older, 2 young, all of them looking at her with the same expression. Not hostility, not yet, just disbelief. "Lord Almighty," one of them said. He was maybe 40, with a sunburned neck and a hat that had seen better decades. His name, she'd find out later, was Deke. "That's who Harlan sent?" The youngest one couldn't have been more than 19, actually laughed. Not mean, just startled, like the punchline of a joke had shown up in person. Martha set her satchel down on the fence post beside her, unfastened the buckle, and pulled out her survey notebook without acknowledging a single one of them. "Is Ethan Rourke on the property?" she asked. Silence. "I asked a question," she said, still not looking up. Deke glanced at the others. "He's up at the house." "Then somebody go tell him Martha Calloway's here." She finally looked up. Her eyes moved from one face to the next, slow, deliberate, giving each man a single moment of direct contact. "Unless one of you would rather explain to him why his new land manager stood at the gate for 10 minutes waiting on basic courtesy." Nobody moved for a beat. Then the youngest one turned and walked toward the house. Martha picked up her satchel and followed him without being invited. The house was a 2-story structure that had been impressive once. She could see the bones of it, solid construction, good lumber. The kind of craftsmanship that meant someone had built this place with the intention of it lasting 100 years. But the porch railing leaned at a wrong angle. The window shutters on the east side hung crooked. The front steps had a board missing on the third one, patched with a strip of tin that had already started to rust. A house showed you everything about its people, if you knew how to read it. Ethan Rourke came through the front door before she reached the steps. He was tall, taller than she'd expected, with the kind of lean, worn-down build that came not from laziness, but from months of carrying too much weight without enough sleep. His jaw was dark, with several days of beard. His shirt was clean, but wrinkled. His eyes, when they landed on her, went through a sequence she'd seen before. Assessment, surprise. A flash of something she chose to read as shame, and then the careful, controlled blank expression of a man who'd decided to say nothing he'd regret. He was 35 years old. He looked 45. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Mr. Rourke." She came up the steps, careful on that third one, and stopped on the porch in front of him. She didn't extend her hand. She'd learned early that some men found that presumptuous, and she wasn't here to fight that particular battle today. "I'd like to walk the full property before sundown, if you can spare someone who knows the northeast pasture line." He blinked. "You just got here. I know. The light goes in about 4 hours." She looked past him toward the horizon. "I'd rather not waste it." He studied her for a long moment. Behind her she could hear Deke and the others drifting closer, pretending to work at things near the fence, listening. "You eat?" Ethan asked. "On the coach. You need to put your things down." "I need to walk the land, Mr. Rourke." She looked back at him. "Everything else can wait." Something moved in his face. Not warmth exactly. More like the first small crack in a wall he'd been building for a long time. "I'll take you myself," he said. Deke made a sound behind them. Not quite a snort. Almost. Ethan turned and looked at him. Just looked. And Deke found something very important to do on the other side of the fence. They walked east first, following the fence line toward the low pasture where the remaining cattle were grazing. Martha said very little. She watched the ground. She crouched twice to press her palm flat against the soil, feeling the moisture level, checking the composition. She pulled up a few inches of grass and examined the root structure. She stood at the edge of the dry creek bed and stared south for almost 2 full minutes without speaking. Ethan walked beside her and waited. He wasn't used to that, to someone who worked in silence, who didn't fill the space with questions or commentary or opinions. His last 2 hired managers had talked constantly. Lot of words, not much underneath them. "How many head did you lose this season?" Martha asked, not turning from the creek bed. 31. All in this pasture. Mostly 8 in the north quarter. When did the creek last run? He thought about it. March, maybe? End of March. And before that, every season I can remember. He paused. My father said it ran even in the drought of 1871. She looked at him then. You have your father's old survey maps. Somewhere, in the house. He frowned. Why? I want to see them tonight. She turned back to the creek. This water didn't just stop, Mr. Rourke. Water doesn't stop on its own. Not a creek this established on a property this well graded. She took a few steps south along the bank. Something's blocking it. He came up beside her. We had a dry winter. This isn't drought. She said it quietly, no argument in her voice, just a simple statement of what she'd already determined. Drought dries from the surface down. The soil moisture pattern here is wrong. It's dry in the channel, but the subsurface on the eastern bank is still holding. That tells me the water's not gone. It's being diverted. She crouched down again and pressed her knuckles into the earth near the bank's edge. Somewhere south of here there's either a dam or a blockage, new construction or a fence line that's been shifted. She stood up and looked at him. He was staring at her. I know that's not what you hired me to come out here and say, she said. No, he said. It isn't. She picked up her satchel and kept walking south. Deke was waiting by the barn when they came back in the fading early evening light. He had his arms crossed and the particular posture of a man who'd spent the last few hours working himself up to something. You find anything worth finding? He asked. The question was directed at Ethan, but his eyes were on Martha. Miss Calloway's going to need the old survey maps, Ethan said, from my father's files. Deke's expression shifted slightly. Those haven't been touched since... From my father's files, Ethan said again. The silence between them had history in it. Martha filed that away without comment. I'll also need to speak with whoever manages your water records, she said to Deke directly. Whoever's been tracking the creek levels and the well output. That'd be Roy, Deke said. But Roy don't work Fridays. Today's Wednesday. Roy starts his weekend early. Martha looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Ethan. Is there somewhere I can set up a workspace? She asked. A table with good light will do. Kitchen table, Ethan said. It's the biggest one. Thank you. She turned toward the house. Behind her, she heard Deke drop his voice low. Ethan, come on. She's gonna sit in your kitchen drawing pictures on maps while the South heard. Drop it, Deke. I'm just saying. I said drop it. Martha climbed the porch steps careful again on the third one and went inside. The kitchen smelled like old coffee and dust, and something sweeter underneath dried herbs maybe, or the ghost of a woman who used to cook in this room and hadn't been here in a long time. Martha didn't ask about that. There was a photograph on the shelf near the window, a man who looked like Ethan, but older, standing beside a woman with her hair pinned up and her hand on a fence post, squinting into the sun. Both of them looking at the camera, like they knew exactly who they were and what they'd built. Ethan's parents, she supposed. She set her satchel on the kitchen table and began laying out her tools. Survey notebook. Compass. 2 different types of pencil. A small magnifying glass. A folded water chart she'd gotten from the Abilene surveyor. Ethan came in behind her and put a lamp on the table without being asked. "I'll get the maps," he said. "Thank you." He started to leave, stopped in the doorway. "Miss Calloway." He had his back to her. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" 12 years, she said, not looking up from her notebook. "Started as a file clerk for a land assessment office in Galveston. Learned the surveying on my own. Took on my first independent contract at 22. She paused. "I've assessed 41 properties in 7 years as an independent. 38 of those were showing signs of deliberate interference with their water or grazing resources." He turned around slowly. 38, he said. 38. She looked up. "This will be 39. His jaw tightened. "You're already sure?" "I'm sure enough to say it." She held his gaze. "I don't make statements I can't back up, Mr. Rourke. If I'm wrong, I'll tell you. But I'm not usually wrong about water." He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he turned and went to get the maps. She worked until past midnight. Ethan stayed up with her drinking coffee he kept burning on the stove, saying very little, but not leaving either. He brought the maps and spread them on the table, and she worked through them one by one, making notations, cross-referencing with the county records she'd pulled before the trip, checking dates and property lines. The kitchen filled with the sound of pencil on paper and the distant low sound of cattle settling for the night. At some point around 11, Ethan refilled her coffee cup without asking. It was a small thing. She didn't mention it. "Your father drew these himself?" she asked, running her finger along a hand-drawn line on the oldest of the maps. "Most of them. Some were done by a county man in the 50s. But Dad updated them every 5 years or so." A pause. "He believed in knowing the land exactly, down to the inch. He was right to." She tapped a point on the map south of the dry creek. "This line here. This is the original southern fence, yes?" Ethan leaned in. "Should be." "And when was this last verified?" He straightened slowly. "Verified. Physically walked. Confirmed that the fence in the ground matches the fence on the map." He was quiet for long enough that she looked up. His face had changed. Something had gone out of it. Not like he was defeated, but like a man who's just understood for the first time the exact shape of the problem he's been inside for months. "Not since my father died," he said. 2 years back." Martha looked at him. Really looked at him. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said. It was simple, direct, no extra weight on it. He nodded once the way men did when they were grateful for brevity. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking," she said carefully, returning to the map, "that your southern fence line may not be where your father drew it, and if someone moved that fence even 100 yards, it could redirect a water source significant enough to explain every head of cattle you've lost this season." The lamp flame moved in the draft from the window. "That's theft," Ethan said. His voice had gone flat. "If someone moved that fence line, they were stealing my water rights." "Yes," Martha said. "They were." "Who would—" He stopped. His hands resting on the table went still. "Mercer," he said very quietly. Martha said nothing. She underlined a date on the map. She folded her hands. "Tell me about Caleb Mercer," she said. He told her. It came out in pieces the way things did when a man had been holding them in for too long. Caleb Mercer worked for a land acquisition company out of San Antonio Southwestern Consolidated. They called themselves, and they'd been buying up ranches across the county for 2 years. Not forcing anyone out. Nothing that crude. Just showing up at the right moment when a man was tired, when the water had failed, when the cattle numbers were down, and the banknote was due, and offering just enough money to make leaving feel like relief instead of defeat. 3 of Ethan's neighbors had sold. 2 more were close. Broken Horn was the largest remaining independent ranch in the southern quarter of the county. And Mercer had come to Ethan twice already, once 8 months ago, once 4 months ago. "What did you tell him?" Martha asked. "I told him this ranch belonged to my father and his father before him, and it wasn't for sale." Ethan's jaw was set hard. Both times. "And what did he say?" Ethan looked at the table. "He said he understood. He said he respected that. He shook my hand and he left." "And 3 weeks after the second visit." Ethan's eyes came up slowly. The creek stopped running. Martha said not quite a question. The silence in the kitchen was different now. Heavier. The kind that settled into the corners of a room and stayed there. "I need to see the south fence line at first light," Martha said, "and I need you to take me, not Deke." He looked at her. "You don't trust Deke." She chose her words with care. "I don't know Deke. I trust observable evidence." She began rolling up the map. "And I don't discuss what I'm observing with people I don't know." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "He's worked this ranch for 9 years. I know," she said, "and I'm not saying anything against him." She set the rolled map aside. "I'm saying that until I understand the shape of what's happened here, I keep my findings close. That's how I work." He looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. "First light," he said. "I'll be at the barn." He pushed back his chair, took his coffee cup to the counter, and paused at the kitchen door. "Miss Calloway," he said. "Yes. Why'd you take this contract?" The question was direct, and she could hear the real thing underneath it. "Why would someone like you come all the way out here for a failing ranch with a desperate man who can't pay premium?" She didn't flinch from the real question. "Because Harlan wrote me a letter," she said. "And in 12 years, Harlan's never been wrong about what's worth showing up for." Ethan Rourke stood in the doorway of his father's kitchen, and something in his face shifted, something deep and tired, and just barely willing to believe. He tipped his hat. She was already back to the maps. The morning came in hard and fast, the way summer mornings did in that part of Texas. No gentle easing into light. Just darkness, and then heat, like the sun had been waiting all night with something to prove. Martha was already at the barn when Ethan got there. He stopped walking when he saw her. She had her satchel over one shoulder, her survey notebook open in her left hand, and she was crouching beside the barn's east wall, pressing 2 fingers into the soil, the same way she'd done at the creek bed the night before. Patient. Methodical. Like the ground owed her an answer, and she was willing to wait for it. "You sleep?" he asked. "Some." She stood, made a notation in her book, didn't look up. "You have a horse that knows the south pasture. Bay gelding named Cutter, 3rd stall. Saddle him for me." He almost said something about that, about whether she rode, about the practicalities of the terrain. He looked at her once, decided against every single word he'd been about to say, and went to saddle Cutter. They rode out before the hands were up. The land south of the main house opened wide and flat before tilting down into a long, shallow basin that caught whatever moisture the sky was willing to give. In a good year, that basin ran green from March through October. This year, it was pale and cracked the grass thin and brittle, the kind of ground that crunched under a hoof instead of giving. Martha rode slightly ahead, which surprised him. She sat a horse better than he'd expected. Not elegant, but solid, efficient, a woman who'd learned to ride because she needed to get somewhere, not because anyone had taught her form. She stopped at the basin's southern edge and looked out across the flat. "How far does your property run from here?" she asked. "About 1.5 miles due south. Then it hits the Garrison Road. And the fence line should follow the property boundary. Should, she said. She nudged Cutter forward without another word. They found it 20 minutes later. Not the fence line itself, not right away. What Martha found first was the absence of something. She pulled up short and held out her hand to slow him, and he reined in beside her, and she sat very still for a moment, just looking at the ground ahead. "What?" he said. "The grass changes," she said. "About 40 yards ahead. You see it." He looked. He'd ridden this section of property 100 times. He looked the way a man looked at something he'd stopped seeing years ago. And then he saw it. The color shift was subtle, a slightly deeper greener line running east to west, about 40 yards in front of them, cutting straight across otherwise identical terrain. Like someone had drawn a line with a brush. Or like one side of that line had been getting something the other side hadn't. "Water," Martha said quietly. "That line is where the moisture runs." She urged Cutter forward slowly. "Which means the source is somewhere on the other side of it." They crossed the line, and the ground changed under the horse's hooves. Not obviously, but Martha noticed it, and he noticed her noticing it, the way she shifted her weight and looked down and made a small sound in her throat that wasn't quite satisfaction, but was close. "It's here," she said. "The water's still here. It's just not moving." She dismounted without ceremony, handed him Cutter's reins, and walked 20 paces due east on foot. He followed on horseback, watching her. She stopped, crouched down, pulled up a handful of soil and smelled it, which was something he had never in his life seen a land assessor do, and then she rubbed it between her fingers and looked north and then south and stood up. "There's a fence," she said. "Somewhere close, east of here, crossing the natural water channel. My fence doesn't run east-west in this section." "I know," she said. "That's what I'm saying." She started walking east. He rode parallel to her, keeping pace, watching the ground the way she watched it, trying to see what she saw. And then Ethan. Her voice had changed. Not louder, lower. The kind of quiet that meant something had just become very real. He rode forward and pulled up beside her and looked at what she was looking at. The fence was old. Not ancient, but weathered enough to look like it had been there a long time, which he understood immediately was the point. The posts were sunk deep and darkened with something stain or creosote, the kind of treatment that made new wood look like it had seen decades of weather. The wire was strung tight, and running along the base of it on the south side was a shallow depression in the earth, the ghost of a water channel redirected. "That fence," Martha said, her voice very level, "is on your property." He stared at it. "It crosses what should be the natural drainage channel from the North Basin." She continued, opening her survey notebook and holding the map against her knee. "Right here." She pointed to a line on the map. "This is where your father's survey shows open flow. This fence cuts straight across it." She looked up at him. "It's not blocking the creek exactly. It's subtler than that. It's been placed just at the angle where it forces surface water to sheet off to the east instead of continuing north into your basin. Anyone looking for a dam would never find one, because there isn't one." She paused. "Just a fence, in the wrong place, doing the wrong job." He got off his horse. He walked to the fence and put his hand on the post. It was solid, well sunk. This wasn't a week's work, or even a month's. Someone had planned this, had known exactly where to put it, exactly what angle to run it, exactly how to weather the lumber so it didn't look new. "When did your father's last map revision happen?" Martha asked behind him. "He died 2 years ago, January," Ethan said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. "He stopped updating maps about 8 months before that. He was sick." "So for at least 2 years," Martha said, "no one's walked this southern line." "No. And Mercer's people would have known that." He turned around slowly. "How would they know that?" She held his gaze steadily. "Because someone told them." She said it plainly. Not with drama, not with accusation in any particular direction. Just the weight of a fact that had to be spoken. Someone who knew the state of this property, who knew your father was sick, who knew the maps hadn't been updated, who knew this section hadn't been ridden regularly. The morning was very bright and very still. "You're saying someone on this ranch." "I'm not saying anything yet," Martha said. "I'm saying the evidence requires an explanation, and the simplest explanation is that Mercer had information he could only have gotten from someone close to this property." She folded the map and put it away. "That's all I'm saying right now." He looked at the fence for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "I'm going to need wire cutters." "Not yet," Martha said. He turned. "Not yet, Martha, this fence is on your property, yes. Illegally placed, yes. Disrupting your water rights, yes." She didn't raise her voice. "And if you cut it this morning, Mercer's people will know within 24 hours that you found it. And then every piece of evidence we need to build an actual legal case disappears, and it becomes your word against his, and he has more lawyers than you have fence posts." She met his eyes. "So, not yet." He stood there with his hands on that illegal fence post, and every part of him wanted to disagree with her. Every part of him that was his father's son, that had grown up understanding that a man defended his land with his hands and his boots, and his presence, every bit of that was pulling him toward the wire cutters. But she was right, and they both knew it. He let go of the post. "What do we do?" he said. "We document everything," Martha said, already pulling out her compass. "We record exact GPS coordinates. We photograph the post depth and the wire angle. We map the water diversion path. We find out who sold the lumber and the wire and when. And then," she looked up at him, "we find out what else Mercer has done that we haven't found yet." "You think there's more?" "A man who goes to this much trouble over a water diversion," she said, "doesn't stop at one trick." She turned east and kept walking. He followed her. They were back at the ranch house by mid-morning. Deke was waiting in the yard. He watched them ride in with the particular stillness of a man cataloging details, where they'd come from, how long they'd been gone, the expression on both their faces. "Good ride," Deke said. "Fine," Ethan said. Flat, no additional words. Martha dismounted, handed the reins to the young hand, who came forward and went straight into the house without a word to anyone. Deke watched her go. Then he looked at Ethan. "She find anything?" Ethan swung down off his horse. He took his time about it. Let Deke wait. "She found the south pasture soils a little dry," Ethan said. "Working on some theories." Deke nodded slowly. "That's what we need. Theories." There was something in his voice. Not quite sarcasm. Just a slight flatness where warmth should have been. "You got something on your mind, Deke, say it straight." Deke pushed off the fence post. "I'm just thinking we got a herd that needs managing and a water problem that needs solving, and you spent the morning riding with a woman who's been here less than a day, that's all." "She's been here less than a day, and she's already found more than anyone else has in 2 years, Ethan said. "So that ought to tell you something." He led his horse toward the barn, without looking back. Martha sat up at the kitchen table again. This time, she spread out 3 maps, the oldest one from Ethan's father's files, the county record she'd brought, and a hand-drawn diagram she was building herself from this morning's observations. She worked with total focus, the kind that made the rest of the room disappear. Roy showed up around 11. He came in through the kitchen door, with no knock, poured himself coffee from the stove, and sat down across from her without being invited. He was 60, maybe older, with a weathered face, and the careful eyes of a man who spent his life watching other people underestimate him. "You're the new manager," he said. "I am," she said, not looking up. "Roy Jessup. I handle water records and feed inventory." "I know. I asked for you yesterday." "I was on an early weekend." "Yes." She looked up. "Do you have the water log books?" He studied her. She waited. "Depends," he said. "On what you plan to do with them." She set her pencil down. She gave him her full attention, which she could tell he hadn't expected. "Mr. Jessup," she said, "I'm going to be straight with you because I think you're a man who respects straight talk." There is an illegally placed fence on the south property line of Broken Horn Ranch that has been diverting water away from this grazing basin for approximately 2 years. I found it this morning. It is the primary cause of the water failure, the dead cattle, and the financial deterioration of this ranch. She paused. The water log books will tell me whether this diversion was gradual or sudden, which will tell me whether it was planned carefully or implemented quickly. That information is important to determining who placed that fence and when and with what level of access to this property's resources. She held his gaze. So I need the logbooks, Mr. Jessup, and I need them now. Roy Jessup sat very still. Then he got up, went down the hall to what she'd learned was a small storage room off the back of the house, and came back with a box of ledger books going back 14 years. He set them on the table. The last entry is from February, he said. Before that, I updated it every 2 weeks. Why did you stop in February? He sat back down. His hands were folded on the table. Something in his face had shifted. Not guilt exactly, but the expression of a man who'd been waiting for someone to ask him that question. Because in February, he said slowly, I told Ethan there was something wrong with the water numbers. The flow rate from the South Basin had dropped by almost 40% from the prior year. I told him something was blocking it, and we needed to walk the South Line. Roy paused. He was grieving his father. He had 3 other problems on his hands. He said he'd look at it when he got a chance. And he never did. Roy's voice wasn't accusing, just tired. And I didn't push it hard enough. So I stopped writing it down because writing it down and watching the numbers get worse without anything being done. He stopped. It felt like writing the obituary of something I couldn't save. Martha looked at him for a long moment. You can save it now, she said. I need you to reconstruct those numbers from memory as best you can. February through today. Whatever you remember. I remember all of it, Roy said quietly. I remember every number. I just stopped writing them. Then start writing them again. She slid a fresh page of notebook paper across the table. Right now, if you're willing. Roy Jessup picked up her extra pencil and started to write. It was mid-afternoon when Ethan came back to the kitchen and found Roy and Martha working side by side at the table papers spread between them. Roy talking in a low, steady voice while Martha wrote. He stopped in the doorway, looked at Roy, looked at Martha. You two introduced yourselves, he said slightly carefully. Mr. Jessup has been extremely helpful, Martha said, not looking up. Roy met Ethan's eyes across the room. Something passed between them. Something old and complicated and layered with the specific weight of 2 years of almost said conversations. Roy looked away first. The water drop started in April of last year, Martha said. Gradual at first, then a 15% single drop in August. Then another drop in November. She traced a line down the numbers Roy had written. That pattern doesn't fit natural drought depletion. It fits 3 separate interventions. 3 adjustments to that fence line, most likely each one increasing the diversion angle. She looked up at Ethan. Whoever built that fence came back to it twice. That's not opportunism, that's management. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. Roy, he said. Roy looked at him. When Mercer's men were out here in the fall, for that property survey they said the county ordered. Roy was very still. Did any of them go south? Ethan asked. Roy set down his pencil. 2 of them, he said. I thought it was routine. Did you go with them? Deke took them. Roy's voice was flat. I offered. Deke said he had it. The kitchen was very quiet. Martha set her pen down and folded her hands on the table and said nothing at all. She looked at the wall above the stove. The photograph of Ethan's parents was still up there, his mother's hand on the fence post, both of them squinting into the sun, looking like they knew exactly who they were. Ethan looked at his hands on the table. I need some air, he said. He pushed back from the table and went out the back door. It didn't slam. That was the part that stayed with Martha, the care he took, not to let it slam, even when everything inside him must have been slamming. Roy picked up his pencil and went back to the numbers. Martha found Ethan at the edge of the south yard, standing with his back to her, looking out at nothing in particular. She came up beside him and stood there without speaking for a minute. Just stood there, letting the weight of the afternoon settle around both of them. "You don't know yet," she said. "I know Deke," he said. "You know who Deke was," she said. "That's not the same thing." He turned to look at her. His face was raw in a way she suspected he didn't often let people see. "How do you do this?" he said. "How do you walk onto a property, and in less than 2 days?" "I don't feel it any less than you do," she said. "I just feel it later." She held his gaze. "When the work's done, when I'm somewhere alone, and I can feel it then." She paused. "But right now, there's still work." He looked at her for a long moment. "What else do you need?" he said. "I need to know if Mercer's company has filed any paperwork with the county in the last 2 years. Survey requests, easement applications, access permits." She looked north toward the house. "I need to go to the county land office." "I can ride with you tomorrow." "I'll go alone," she said. Not harsh, just firm. "If Mercer has someone watching this property and I think he might, I don't want him to see you at the land office. It signals that you know something." She looked at him. "Let him think everything's still quiet." "And what do I do in the meantime?" "Be normal," she said. "Whatever normal looks like here. Let Deke run the morning rotation. Don't change anything he'd notice." She paused. "And don't look at him any differently than you always have." "That's asking a lot." "I know," she said. "Can you do it?" He breathed out slow through his nose, looked at the horizon. "I grew up with that man," he said. "I know," she said again. "I'm sorry." He didn't say anything else. She turned and walked back toward the house. She had 3 more hours of good light and a box of ledger books to finish with Roy. Behind her, she heard Ethan's boots finally turn and follow. That evening, after Roy went home and the hands had eaten and the ranch settled into its nighttime quiet, Martha sat alone at the kitchen table with the oldest of the survey maps unrolled in front of her and a growing sick certainty taking shape in her chest. She'd found 3 things in the ledger books that didn't appear in Roy's memory of them because Roy hadn't thought to put them there. 3 entries in different handwriting, smaller, neater, the handwriting of someone making quick notations in someone else's book. Each entry was innocent on its own: a feed delivery note, a maintenance schedule, a water pump reading. But each one was dated the week before one of Roy's documented flow rate drops, and each one was initialed with 2 letters she'd seen on the property once before: D.K. Deke, Kinsley. She didn't go to Ethan with it that night. She sat with it. She turned it over. She checked it against every other possibility she could construct and found that the alternatives required increasingly unlikely coincidences to hold together. Then she made a new column in her notebook and started writing down what she was going to need to prove it. Outside, the Texas dark, pressed against the windows, thick and total, the way it only was this far from any town. The lamp on the table burned down by a third, and she didn't notice. The clock on the kitchen wall said 11:40, and then said midnight, and she didn't notice that either. She was thinking about a fence line in the wrong place on a piece of land that had never stopped giving water until someone decided to take it. She was thinking about a man who had his father's maps and his father's land and his father's hard belief that you could know a place down to the inch if you paid it enough attention. She was thinking about how much a man could lose without ever knowing he was being robbed. And she was thinking that she had come to Broken Horn Ranch for Harlan's sake, because Harlan trusted her judgment, and she trusted his instincts, and in 12 years, she had never walked away from a property that needed someone to see it clearly. She was not going to start now. She turned to a fresh page in her notebook, wrote the date at the top, and started building the case from the beginning. She left before sunrise. Ethan heard her horse pull out of the barn in the gray hour before dawn, and he lay in his bed for 30 seconds, debating with himself before he got up and went to the window. She rode south first, which made no sense if she was headed to town, and then cut east along the basin edge in a wide arc that told him she was checking something before she left, making sure the fence was still where they'd found it, making sure nothing had been disturbed in the night. He watched her ride until the dark swallowed her up. Then he went downstairs and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table where her papers still smelled faintly of pencil lead and lamp oil. And he thought about Deke Kinsley for the first time, the way you had to think about a man when you were no longer sure of him. Not with rage. With something quieter and worse than rage. With the particular grief of understanding that a betrayal had been happening close to you for a long time, while you were looking somewhere else. Deke showed up at this barn at the usual hour. Ethan was already there. They worked the morning rotation side by side, the way they'd done for 9 years, checking water buckets, counting head in the north pasture, mending a gate latch that had worked loose in the heat. They talked about the practical things. Deke said the south herd looked thin. Ethan said he knew. Deke said they ought to think about moving them to the east quarter for the week. Ethan said that made sense. And the whole time Ethan kept his face exactly as it always was. He thought that was the hardest thing he'd ever done in his life. By the time Martha got back from the county land office, it was past noon, and the heat was sitting on the ranch like a hand pressed flat and heavy across every living thing. She came through the kitchen door, put her satchel on the table, and looked at Roy, who'd come back this morning without being asked. Sitting in his regular chair, with a fresh cup of coffee, and 2 more ledger books he'd retrieved from a shelf in the storage room. "Roy," she said, "how many easement applications has this county processed in the last 3 years?" Roy looked up. "Couldn't say. Dozens, maybe." 67, Martha said. "I counted them. 41 of those were filed by Southwestern Consolidated or their subsidiaries." She put a thick folded packet of copied records on the table. 41 easements in 3 years, Roy, in a county with 32 functioning ranches. Roy set down his coffee cup very carefully. "They're buying access," he said. "Not ownership, access." "Water access," Martha said. "Grazing access, road access. They don't need to own the land. They just need to control everything that makes the land work." She opened the packet and spread 3 pages across the table. "And here's what I found that I didn't expect." She pointed to a name on the second page. Roy leaned forward, read it, sat back. His face went through something complex and slow. "That's Judge Harmon," he said. "Yes, he's been on the county bench for 18 years, Martha said. And he's approved every single one of Southwestern Consolidated's easement applications. Every one. Including 3 that border Broken Horn's southern property line directly." She tapped the 3rd page. "And this one filed 14 months ago includes a rights-of-way notation that would grant Southwestern survey teams legal access to within 200 yards of our south fence line." She looked at Roy directly. "That's how Mercer's men got out there without trespassing. They had legal paperwork. Deke didn't let strangers onto the property. He let men with a county-approved access document." Roy was quiet for a long time. "Deke might not have known," he said. "Finally." "Maybe," Martha said. She sat down. "That's what I have to find out." Ethan walked in from the back and stopped when he saw the papers spread across the table. His eyes moved from the pages to Martha's face and read it immediately. "You found something," he said. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She told him. All of it. The 41 easements, Judge Harmon, the rights-of-way notation, the legal framework that had given Mercer's people access to the southern property line without committing a single act of obvious trespass. She told him clearly and without softening any of it, and she watched his face move through disbelief and then cold fury, and then something beyond fury, a kind of exhausted bone-deep recognition. "They built the whole thing," he said, "before they even came to me the first time." "Yes," she said. "They set up the legal access, moved the fence, diverted the water, killed my cattle, ran my numbers into the ground." His voice was very steady, which was somehow more frightening than if it had broken. "And then they showed up at my door with an offer." "Yes. And when I said no, they came back and adjusted the fence again," she said. Made the diversion worse. Waited for the second visit to fail. And then... She paused. What? He said. I don't know yet what comes next, she said. But I know they haven't stopped. This is a patient operation, Ethan. These people don't rush. They squeeze. She held his gaze. Which means there's something else. Something we haven't found yet. He looked at the papers. His jaw was tight, and his hands were flat on the table, and he was breathing slow and controlled the way a man breathed when he was keeping something very large, very contained. What do you need? He said. I need to look at your cattle loss records, she said. The actual mortality reports. Where the animals died, what condition they were in, what the official cause was listed as. The vet filed those. I know. Do you have copies? In my father's office. I haven't been in there since... He stopped. Started again. Since he passed. Martha looked at him. I can go in alone, she said. If you tell me where to look. He shook his head, once short and decisive. No, he said. I'll take you. The office was a small room off the main hallway that smelled like old paper and boot leather, and something Martha recognized after a moment as pipe tobacco. Faint long faded the ghost of a habit. There was a large roll-top desk against the far wall, a set of map drawers underneath it, a shelf of record books above. On the corner of the desk sat a coffee mug that someone had never cleared away. It had gone dry a long time ago. Ethan stood in the doorway. He hadn't set foot in here. That was obvious. The room had the particular stillness of a place that had been avoided. Martha walked in without hesitation. She went straight to the record books and started reading spines. The vet's name, she said. Cal Briggs. Briggs Animal Services out of Marfa. She found the folder inside a ledger marked Livestock 2022 to 2023. She brought it to the desk and opened it. Ethan came in behind her slowly, like a man re-entering a place that still hurt to be in. She read for 4 minutes without speaking. Ethan, she said. Yeah. The first 8 cattle deaths, the ones in the North Quarter. Yeah. The official cause listed here is dehydration and heat stress. That's what Briggs said. But the North Quarter has a functioning well. She looked up. I saw it yesterday. It's running. It is now, he said. We had a pump failure in the spring. Roy got it fixed in April. When did the North Quarter cattle die? He thought. March. End of March. She looked back at the file. The pump failure. Do you have a maintenance record for it? He crossed the room and opened a drawer in the roll-top desk. He pulled out a thin file, looked through it, handed her a single sheet. She read it, set it down, picked it up again. This pump was serviced 8 months before it failed, she said. And the service report says it was in good working order. Pumps fail, he said. They do. She set the page down. But this one failed in the same month that Mercer's survey team was granted legal access to the North Property Quadrant. She moved back to the easement records she'd carried from the kitchen, found the right page, pointed to a date. Ethan read it. That's 2 weeks before the pump failed, he said. Yes. They didn't just mess with the water in the south, he said. His voice had gone very quiet. They hit the north well too. I believe so, yes. She closed the folder. A compromised pump looks like equipment failure. No one investigates equipment failure. You call the mechanic, get it fixed, move on. You don't connect it to a survey team that was legally on your property 2 weeks earlier. She looked at him. This is what I meant about patience. Every single piece of this looks like bad luck. Weather equipment drought. None of it looks like a plan. Until you put it all in the same room, he said. Until you put it all in the same room, she confirmed. He pulled the chair out from his father's desk and sat down in it. He hadn't done that before. She could see it in the way he sat. Careful. Like the chair might not take his weight. Like sitting in it meant something he wasn't fully ready to accept. He leaned his elbows on his father's desk and put his hands over his face for just a moment. Just one moment. Then he took them away and looked at her and his eyes were clear. "How long?" he said. "To build a case that holds up." "Depends on what we find next," she said. "But I think we're close." She picked up the vet file and the maintenance record and the easement pages. "I need to talk to Briggs." "Cal Briggs is a good man." "I'm sure he is," she said. "But a good man can write a wrong report if someone gives him wrong information, or if someone asks him the wrong questions." She looked at Ethan. "I want to know what he actually saw when those cattle died. What he remembers. Not what's written here. He's in Marfa." "I know. I'll go tomorrow." She paused. "Tonight I want to walk the north pasture." "In the dark." "The well's in the north pasture. I want to look at the ground around the casing." She met his eyes. "I can go alone." "No," he said again. Same as before. Short, flat, final. "I'll come." They took lanterns. The north pasture was a 20-minute walk from the house on foot, and they went in near silence, the kind that had stopped being uncomfortable sometime in the last 18 hours, and had become instead a shared working quiet. Two people who had enough to think about, that words would only slow them down. The well casing was a standard steel pipe, maybe 18 inches across, set in a concrete surround. Ethan held the lantern while Martha crouched and looked at the ground around the base. She pressed her fingers into the soil. She moved the lantern lower. She ran her fingertip along the edge of the concrete where it met the earth. "Hold it closer," she said. He crouched beside her and brought the lantern close enough that they were shoulder to shoulder in the small pool of light. She smelled like horses and pencil dust and the particular clean sweat of a woman who'd been working hard all day without apology. "Here," she said quietly. She was pointing at a line in the concrete surround. Not a crack, the concrete was intact, but along one edge, maybe 6 inches of it, showed a color difference. Slightly darker. Slightly newer. "Someone patched this," she said. He looked at it closely. "Could be old work. My father did work on this well years." "Feel the texture," she said. He touched it, compared it to the adjacent surface. The patched section was smoother, less weathered. "That's recent," he said. "Yes." She sat back. "I think someone opened this casing and put something in. Something that would degrade the pump mechanism over a few weeks. Nothing dramatic, just corrosive, enough to cause a mechanical failure that looked routine." She stood. "If Briggs did a blood panel on those cattle, I want to see the raw results, not just the summary. He would have the raw results in his files." "I know." She was already walking back toward the house. "That's why I'm going to Marfa." He straightened and followed her, carrying the lantern, the light swinging between them. "Martha," he said. She didn't slow down. "Yes." "Why are you doing this?" She walked 3 more paces before she answered. "Because it's the right thing," she said. Not defensive. Not preachy. Just matter of fact, the way she said most things. "And because I'm good at it. And because someone ought to be." He walked beside her through the dark Texas night and didn't say anything else. She was back in the kitchen at 2 in the morning when she heard the sound. It was small, a creak, then a soft thud, the specific sound of the barn's east door opening and closing, which she knew, because she'd been listening to the property's nighttime sounds for 2 nights now and had cataloged them the same way she cataloged everything. The horses settling was one sound. The windmill's turn in the west yard was another. The barn's east door had a particular voice. It wasn't Ethan's hour to check the horses. Roy had gone home. The young hand Tommy slept in the bunkhouse on the other side of the property. She blew out her lamp. She sat in the dark kitchen and listened. Footsteps. Moving away from the barn going east. Not running. Careful. Trying to be quiet, which was different from being quiet. She waited 5 full minutes. Then she lit the lamp again at its lowest possible level and went to the barn. The horses were undisturbed. The feed bins were intact. The tack room was locked, same as always. She went slowly through the space, holding the lamp low, checking the walls, the floor, the corners. In the southeast corner of the barn, under a loose board, she only found because she was looking at the floor. Instead of the walls, she found a folded piece of paper weighted down with a piece of harness leather. She unfolded it. It was written in pencil. 7 words and a number. He wants to meet. $10,000. She stood there in the barn with the lamp in one hand and the note in the other, and she felt a cold clarity move through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. Someone on this property had just been offered $10,000, and they were considering it. She refolded the note exactly the way she'd found it, replaced it under the board, replaced the harness leather on top. Then she walked back to the house and sat down at the table and opened her notebook and wrote everything down: the time, the sound, the footsteps going east, the note, the exact wording, the location. She didn't go wake Ethan, not yet, because she still didn't know who had put the note there. She knew someone had gone to retrieve it or leave it. She knew the east direction, which meant the south fence line, which meant Mercer's territory. But she didn't know yet which of the 3 men on this property had a reason to be standing in that barn at 2 in the morning. She needed to know before she spoke. By 5 in the morning, she'd made a decision. She wasn't going to Marfa alone. She woke Roy first at his small house on the edge of the property with a quiet knock and 2 short words when he opened the door. "Come now." He came. He was dressed in 3 minutes, which told her something about the kind of man he was. She told him about the note, told him about the footsteps, told him what she needed. Roy listened with his arms crossed and his face very still. "You need to know if it was Deke," he said when she finished. "I need to know who made that walk," she said. Roy looked east toward the main barn. "Deke sleeps closest to the east door," he said. "Always has. Says he likes to hear the horses." "Is that unusual?" "No," Roy said. "That's just Deke." He was quiet for a moment. "But there's one thing." She waited. "Deke's got a brother," Roy said slowly. "Half-brother. Name's Webb Kinsley. Webb works for a land survey company out of San Antonio." He looked at her. "I don't know which company." Martha looked at Roy steadily. "When did Deke's brother start at that company?" she said. "I don't know exactly. Maybe 2 years back. Maybe a little more." 2 years. The same window as the fence. The same window as the pump. The same window as everything. "Roy," she said, "I need you to ride into town this morning and send a telegraph to the Federal Land Office in Austin. I need them to run a name for me. Webb Kinsley, Land Surveyor, San Antonio based." She paused. "And I need you to do it before Deke's up." Roy was already moving toward his horse. She told Ethan at breakfast. All of it. The note, Roy's information about Webb Kinsley, the 2-year timeline. She set it out in front of him the same way she spread a map, flat, clear every element where it belonged. He sat with his hands around his coffee cup, and he listened, and he didn't interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a while. "Deke," he said. "Not a question. Not yet. Just the name sitting in the air between them." "I don't know that it was Deke," she said. "I know it was someone who knew where that board was loose. Someone who moves around this property at night without attracting attention. Someone whose brother works for a San Antonio survey company that may or may not be connected to Southwestern Consolidated." She held his gaze. "That is what I know." "But you think it was Deke?" She didn't look away. "Yes," she said. "I think it was Deke." Ethan set down his coffee cup. He stood up. He walked to the back door and stood with his hand on the frame and looked out at his father's land going golden in the early morning light. "He came to my father's funeral," Ethan said. His voice was even, careful, controlled in that way that was costing him something. "He cried. I saw him cry." "I know," Martha said quietly. "I believe that was real." He turned around. "Then how do you—" "Because sometimes," she said, "a person can love something and still be convinced to betray it, especially if they're told it's already over, especially if someone offers them enough money to soften the guilt. She kept her voice steady. Whoever made that offer to Deke told him Broken Horn was finished, that the water was gone, the cattle were dying, and you'd sell within the year anyway. They told him he might as well take the money because there was nothing left to protect. Ethan stared at her. And the worst part, she said, is that 2 weeks ago that was almost true. He stood there in the morning light of his father's kitchen, and something in him shifted. She could see it not breaking nothing so simple as breaking. More like the specific moment when a man stops grieving a thing that hasn't finished happening yet and decides to fight back instead. He pulled out his chair and sat back down. "What do we do next?" he said. She opened her notebook. "We wait for Roy," she said. "And then we go to Marfa." Roy rode back in before 9 with a telegraph reply that had come faster than any of them expected, which told Martha that the federal land office in Austin already had Webb Kinsley's name in a file somewhere. She read the reply 3 times, handed it to Ethan. He read it once, set it on the table. Webb Kinsley was not a surveyor for a private company. Webb Kinsley was listed as a contracted field agent for Southwestern Consolidated Land Acquisitions, operating under a surveying license that had been issued 18 months ago, around the same time Martha noted quietly as the second easement application on Broken Horn's southern boundary. "He's not a surveyor," Ethan said. "He's Mercer's man. He's one of Mercer's men," Martha said. "In the field. Which means Mercer's been using legitimate survey licenses as cover for reconnaissance operations on target properties." She set the telegraph down. "That's a federal land fraud statute violation, potentially several." She looked up. "But I need Briggs's cattle records before I take this to a federal agent. I need to show them not just water fraud, I need to show them that cattle were deliberately killed, that this operation caused material destruction of property and income." She stood. "That changes the charge category entirely." Roy was watching her from across the table. There was something in his face that hadn't been there 2 days ago. Something like relief. Like a man watching a problem that has been sitting on his chest for 2 years finally start to move. "You ride to Marfa now," he said. "Now," she said. She looked at Ethan. "Are you coming?" He was already reaching for his hat. "One more thing," she said, stopping him. "Before we go." She looked at both of them in turn. "While we're away, no one touches that note under the board in the barn. No one speaks to Deke about any of this. If he asks where we've gone, tell him we're looking at water sources on the east boundary." She paused. "We need him to believe nothing has changed." "And if he goes back to the barn," Roy said, "and finds the note still there, then he'll think whoever left it is still waiting for an answer," Martha said. "Which gives us time." She put on her hat. "Let's go." They went out into the full heat of the Texas morning, the 3 of them moving with the particular purpose of people who finally know what they're after. Behind them, deep in the southeast corner of the barn, under a loose board weighted with a piece of harness leather, a folded note sat in the dark and waited. The road to Marfa ran straight and unforgiving through country that didn't care whether you made it or not. Ethan drove. Martha sat beside him with her notebook open on her knee and the telegraph reply folded in her satchel and the full weight of everything they'd built over the last 3 days sitting quietly between them like a third passenger. Roy had stayed behind. That had been Martha's call. She needed someone at the ranch she trusted, and Roy was the only one who fit that description completely. She'd told him to watch the barn. Watch the note. Watch Deke without watching him, which Roy understood immediately, because Roy was the kind of man who'd spent his whole career being underestimated and had learned to make that work for him. The wagon hit a rough patch, and Martha's pencil skipped across the page. She didn't curse. She capped the pencil, closed the notebook, and looked at the road ahead. "Tell me about Briggs," she said. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Cal Briggs has been the county vet for 20 years. Honest man, hard-working. He was at my father's bedside when we put down a horse my father'd had for 15 years. Cried more than either of us." He paused. "He's not dirty." "I'm not saying he's dirty," Martha said. "I'm saying someone may have shaped what he saw, not by lying to him, by giving him incomplete information. by making sure he examined those cattle after certain evidence was already gone. Ethan glanced at her. How long does something like that stay in the system, whatever they put in the well? Depends on the compound. Some dissipate in 48 hours, some in a week. She looked at the road. If the cattle started dying 2 to 3 weeks after the well was tampered with, and Briggs examined them at the point of death, he'd be looking at animals that showed the downstream effects: dehydration organ, stress, weight loss, without any of the primary chemical markers still present. So it would look like drought, he said. It would look exactly like drought, she said, which is the point. They drove in silence for a while. The heat pressed down on everything. The horizon shimmered. "Martha," Ethan said. "Yes." "If Briggs's raw blood panels show what you think they show, what exactly are we dealing with legally?" She was quiet for a moment, organizing the answer before she gave it. "If we can prove deliberate chemical interference with your water supply that caused the death of 31 head of cattle." She said, "That's not a civil property dispute anymore. That's criminal destruction of livestock under Texas statute, which carries a felony charge. Combined with the fraudulent easement applications, the illegal fence placement, the surveying license used as cover for reconnaissance, we're into federal territory. Specifically, we're looking at land fraud coordinated across county lines using falsified government documentation." She paused. "That brings in the Federal Land Office, potentially the U.S. Marshal's Office." Ethan's hands tightened on the reins. "Mercer," he said. Flat, cold. "Mercer authorized it," Martha said. "But Mercer's careful. He won't have signed anything he didn't have to sign. We need the chain, the fence, the well, the easements, the cattle deaths, all of it documented and connected before we put his name at the top." She turned to look at him. "This is why we go to Briggs first, not last." He nodded once and said nothing else, and they drove the rest of the way to Marfa, with the hot Texas wind coming through, and both of them thinking hard about different parts of the same problem. Cal Briggs operated out of a low building on the south edge of Marfa, with a hand-painted sign above the door and a hitching post out front that had seen decades of use. He was inside when they arrived, a compact, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the permanent squint of someone who spent half his life working outdoors. He looked up from his desk when they walked in, and his face moved through recognition, and then something more complex when he registered Ethan's expression. "Ethan," he said, "what's happened?" "Cal, this is Martha Calloway," Ethan said. "She's my land manager. She's been assessing the property." Briggs looked at Martha. She could see the automatic assessment happening: her size, her gender, her age, and she could see him set it aside quickly because he was looking at her face, and her face wasn't leaving him room for that kind of detour. "Ma'am," he said. "Mr. Briggs," she said. "I need to see your raw blood panel results for the broken horn cattle you examined in March and April of last year, not the summary reports, the raw data." He looked at her steadily. "That's patient records. Those cattle are dead," she said. "Ethan Rourke is their owner of record, and he's present and he's authorizing the review." She set her satchel on the corner of his desk. "I believe your summary findings were accurate based on what you had available to examine. I believe the raw data will show something your summary findings didn't capture because you didn't know what to look for." Briggs looked at Ethan. Ethan held his gaze and said, "Please, Cal." Briggs took off his reading glasses, cleaned them on his shirt, put them back on. He got up and went to a filing cabinet in the back corner of the room, opened the second drawer, and worked through it with practiced efficiency. He came back with a thick file folder. "The March animals are in the front," he said. He put the folder on the desk and opened it and stepped back. "I'll give you room." Martha stepped forward and started reading. She read for 6 minutes. Ethan stayed back and let her work. Briggs stood with his arms crossed and watched her with the expression of a man who was recalibrating something. "Here," Martha said. Briggs came around the desk to look at where she was pointing. She was indicating a column in the third panel result, a subcategory reading under the primary blood chemistry analysis. "That's the mineral panel," Briggs said. Standard inclusion. Those values were within the sulfate reading, Martha said. This animal showed 4 times the normal baseline. Briggs looked at it. Sulfate variance can come from feed source, mineral-heavy soil. It's not on its own, no, Martha said. But look at the iron reading on the same animal. And the manganese. She looked up at him. All 3 elevated. Not dramatically, not at flaggable levels on their own, but together, and at these specific ratios. This is the mineral signature of water that has been exposed to a particular class of industrial corrosive agent. She paused. The kind used to accelerate mechanical degradation in steel pump casings. The room went very still. Briggs took his glasses off again. He looked at the panel. He looked at Martha. I would have needed to be looking for that specifically, he said slowly. It wouldn't have triggered on a standard review. I know, Martha said. I'm not saying you missed it. I'm saying someone arranged for you to look at animals at a stage where this would read as background noise rather than cause. Briggs set his glasses on the desk. His voice had gone very careful. How many animals show this signature? I've looked at 4 panels so far. All 4. She was already moving through the file. I need to check the rest. She checked them all. It took 20 minutes. Briggs stood beside her the whole time following along, and she watched him move through surprise, and then recognition, and then something that looked like quiet, controlled anger. 11 of the 12 animals I examined, she said when she'd finished, all showing the same mineral elevation pattern. She looked at Briggs directly. In your professional judgment, does this data support the conclusion that these animals were exposed to chemical contamination through their primary water source? Briggs looked at the papers for a long moment. Yes, he said. His voice was flat and certain. Yes, it does. Would you be willing to file a supplemental finding to that effect attached to your original reports? He was already reaching for his pen. They came out of Briggs's office with a signed supplemental finding, a certified copy of all 12 blood panels, and the name of a federal land agent in El Paso that Briggs himself volunteered, a man named Doyle, a woman as it turned out. Agent Patricia Doyle, who had apparently been building a case file on Southwestern Consolidated for the better part of a year, and had been waiting for exactly this kind of documented evidence from an active target property. Briggs had called ahead from his office. Doyle was expecting them by 3 o'clock. Ethan had not said much since they left Briggs's office. He drove, and Martha let him drive, and she organized the documents in her satchel, with the particular careful attention of someone who understood that the physical condition of evidence mattered as much as its content. After a while, Ethan said, he was already investigating them. Doyle. Mercer, Southwestern Consolidated. The federal office was already building a case. He said it the way you said a thing when the weight of it was still settling into you. We weren't the only ones. Probably not, Martha said. Operations like this don't start with one ranch. They need a pattern to function. Multiple acquisitions, multiple forced sales, multiple county judges, doing the kind of favors that don't show up in meeting minutes. She looked at the road. We're most likely one of several target properties. We may be the one with the most complete documentation, which is why Doyle wants to see us today. Why us? Because most of the others probably sold. She said it simply without softening it. When a property gets squeezed hard enough for long enough, the owner sells. That ends the documentation trail because the sale itself becomes the record. A sale looks like a conclusion. She glanced at him. You didn't sell. I never would have, he said. I know, she said. That's why we have a case. He drove in silence for another mile. The road was emptier now, the landscape opening wide and pale around them. When this is over, he said. Yes. What do you do? Where do you go? She considered the question. There's usually another property, she said. There's always another Harlan writing a letter about a place that needs someone to come look at it straight. She paused. It's not a glamorous life. It's a necessary one, he said. She looked at him. He was watching the road, his profile steady and calm in the afternoon heat. And there was something in his voice that hadn't been there 2 days ago. Not warmth exactly, or not just warmth, but the specific register of a man who had started to understand that the person sitting beside him was not what he'd assumed when she stepped off that stagecoach. Not smaller than he'd thought, not larger, different. Exactly as large as the work she was doing, which turned out to be very large indeed. "Yes," she said, "it is." Agent Patricia Doyle was a lean, direct woman in her mid-40s, with close-cut gray hair and the economical body language of someone who had learned long ago to project authority through stillness rather than volume. She met them in a federal building on the edge of El Paso that smelled like floor wax and old coffee. Shook Ethan's hand, shook Martha's hand, looked at them both with the same level measuring attention, and said, "Sit down. Tell me what you found," Martha told her. Precisely, in sequence. With the documents laid out in the order she'd organized them in the wagon, the fence, the easements, Judge Harmon, the well tampering, the blood panels, the note in the barn. Webb Kinsley's employment history. She spoke for 22 minutes without interruption, and Doyle listened with her hands flat on the desk and her eyes moving between Martha's face and the pages as they were presented. When Martha finished, Doyle looked at the complete array of documents spread across her desk. "The supplemental filing from Briggs," she said. "He'll stand behind this." "He signed it this afternoon," Martha said. "He'll stand behind it." Doyle picked up the easement pages, looked at Judge Harmon's signature on 4 of them, set them back down with the particular care of someone setting down something that required very delicate handling. "Judge Harmon has been a problem for 18 months, Doyle said. "We've had indicators, but nothing clean." She looked up. "This is clean." "It's a pattern," Martha said. "Every southwestern consolidated easement in that county for 3 years goes through Harmon. Every one approved. No variance, no denial, no standard review period. Approval within 7 business days of filing in every case." She paused. "The county average for non-southwestern easement applications is 11 weeks. Doyle looked at her. "You pulled comparative approval timelines," Doyle said. "I was at the county land office yesterday," Martha said. "The records are public. It took 40 minutes. Doyle sat back in her chair. There was something moving in her expression, not quite admiration, but the professional recognition of one thorough person encountering another. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" Doyle asked. Martha told her. Doyle nodded slowly. "All right," Doyle said. She stood up. "I need to make 2 calls. I'm going to ask you to wait in the hall." They waited. The hall was cool and quiet, and Ethan leaned against the wall beside Martha and crossed his arms and stared at the floor. After a while he said, "Do you think she'll move on it?" "Yes," Martha said. "How soon?" "I don't know. But she was waiting for this kind of documentation. She won't let it sit." She looked straight ahead. "The question is whether Mercer has someone inside the federal office." Ethan looked at her sharply. "Does he—" "I don't know," she said. "I'm saying it's a consideration. Men who build operations this careful usually have a contingency." She kept her voice low and even. "It's why I want to get back to the ranch tonight." "You think something will happen tonight?" "I think that note in the barn has been sitting unanswered for almost 24 hours, she said. "And whoever left it is going to need a response. Which means whoever on the property is supposed to respond is running out of time to do it without attracting attention." She paused. "Something is going to happen tonight. I'd rather be there." The door opened and Doyle came back out. "We're moving," Doyle said. "I've got a warrant application going to a federal judge this afternoon, not Harmon, before you ask." A brief grim flicker of something crossed her face. "My team will be at the Broken Horn property tomorrow morning. Early." She looked at Ethan. "I'm going to need you to not do anything tonight. Whatever you suspect, whatever you see, do nothing. Let it happen. Can you do that?" Ethan looked at her for a moment. "If Mercer's people try to destroy evidence on my property tonight—" "We have the evidence," Doyle said. She nodded at Martha's satchel. "Copies stay with us tonight. Whatever they try to destroy, they can't destroy what's already in federal hands. She held his gaze. Mr. Rourke, can you hold? He breathed out slowly. Yes, he said. Good. She extended her hand. Be at your ranch at dawn. Don't run. Don't rush. Just be there. He shook it. Martha was already repacking her satchel. Chapter to taco. They drove back in the early evening dark, the wagon moving fast on the empty road, with the first stars showing overhead, and the heat finally giving a fraction after a day of absolute insistence. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then Ethan said, She said don't do anything. Yes, Martha said. That's going to be hard. I know. Especially if I look at Deke across the supper table and know what I know. I know, she said again. But you have to. What if he runs? Ethan said. What if he figures out tonight that something's shifted and he runs before morning? Martha had thought about this for the last 2 hours. If Deke runs, she said carefully, then Mercer loses his inside man. He loses his early warning system. He'll know something has changed. He may try to move his assets, destroy documentation on his end, which is exactly what Doyle's warrant is designed to prevent. She paused. Deke running is not ideal, but it's not catastrophic. He's not the primary target. He betrayed this ranch, Ethan said. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that caused him to keep caged. He stood at my father's grave, and then he helped dismantle everything my father built. Yes, Martha said. He did. I want to understand why. He wasn't asking her. Not really. He was saying something out loud that had been sitting inside him for hours. I've been trying to understand it all day and I can't get there. Martha was quiet for a moment. Maybe he thought the ranch was already lost, she said finally. Maybe Mercer's people told him that, and he believed it because part of him had already started to believe it himself. A man watching a ranch die slowly, the water going, the cattle dying. The numbers dropping at some point, maybe he decided that the loyalties he owed were to a living thing, and the living thing was already gone. She kept her voice even. I'm not saying that makes it right. I'm saying it makes it human. He didn't respond to that. They drove another mile in silence, and then he said quietly, My father trusted him. Your father trusted his own judgment about people, Martha said. And his judgment wasn't wrong about who Deke was. It just couldn't account for who Deke would become under enough pressure. She looked at the darkening road. Nobody's judgment covers that. Not all the way. He didn't say anything else. She didn't push it. But Tim. They got back to the ranch at 9. Roy was sitting on the porch. That alone told her something. Roy didn't sit on porches. He worked or he went home. He sat on that porch in the dark because he had something to tell her, and he didn't want to tell it inside. She was off the wagon before it fully stopped. What happened? She said. Roy looked at Ethan, then back at Martha. Deke left at 6, Roy said. Packed a bag, took his horse, told Tommy he was going to visit his sister in Presidio. Does he have a sister in Presidio? Martha said. He has a sister in Amarillo, Roy said. I don't know anybody in Presidio. Ethan was standing very still. Did he go back to the barn before he left? Martha asked. Yes, Roy said. About 4 o'clock, stayed maybe 5 minutes. Martha turned and walked to the barn without a word. She found the loose board. She lifted it. The harness leather was still there. The note was gone. She stood up, breathed. He'd taken the note, destroyed the evidence, or brought it to whoever had left it, which meant the same thing. She turned around, and Ethan was standing in the barn doorway behind her, and he already knew from her face what she'd found. It's gone, he said. Yes. Does that hurt the case? She thought about it for 3 precise seconds. No, she said. The note existed. I documented it the night I found it, exact wording, exact location, exact time, exact condition of the paper. That documentation is now in federal hands. She met his eyes. Deke removing it tells us he made his decision. And a man who makes that decision at 6 in the evening after a note has been sitting unanswered for 24 hours is a man who was given a deadline. Mercer's tightening the timeline, Ethan said. Yes, she said. Which means he knows something is moving. She came out of the barn. Or he suspects it. Roy was waiting just outside. There's something else, he said. They both looked at him. Roy reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope. This came to the house this afternoon, County Post, addressed to you, Ethan. Return address is a law firm in San Antonio. Ethan took it, opened it, read it. His face went absolutely flat. He handed it to Martha without a word. She read it. It was a formal legal notice. Southwestern Consolidated Land Acquisitions, represented by a firm with 4 names on the letterhead, was filing an injunction in County Court Judge Harmon's court, claiming that Broken Horn Ranch had violated the terms of the 3 existing easement agreements by interfering with survey access rights on the southern property boundary. The injunction, if granted, would freeze all property transfers and modifications on Broken Horn pending a court hearing. A hearing scheduled for 4 days from today, before Doyle's warrant could complete its process, before a federal case could be formally filed. They were trying to get to Harmon first. If Harmon grants this injunction, Ethan said, his voice very controlled. What happens? The property gets tied up in county court proceedings, Martha said, which Mercer's lawyers run out as long as they can, which makes the property non-transferable, non-mortgageable, effectively frozen. She looked at the letter. It also creates a legal record that Broken Horn was in violation of easement terms, which goes into any future title search and clouds the ownership history permanently. She set the letter down. It's a last resort move. He's using it because he knows the federal case is coming, and he wants to get to Harmon before Doyle gets to Harmon. Can we stop it? Ethan said. Doyle's warrant covers Harmon's court activity, she said, if it goes through tonight. If, Roy said. If, she confirmed. She looked at both of them. I need to call Doyle tonight, now. There's no telegraph office open at this hour, Roy said. Is there anyone in this county with a direct line to El Paso? Roy and Ethan looked at each other. Sheriff Alderman, Ethan said slowly. He's got a federal relay line, installed 2 years back. Does he know Mercer? Martha said. He's known Mercer for 20 years, Ethan said carefully. Martha absorbed that. But does he know what Mercer is? She said. Ethan thought about it, genuinely thought about it, not just for show. I don't think so, he said. Alderman's a fair man. He's just comfortable. He doesn't look for trouble. Then we go to him, Martha said. Tonight, right now. She picked up her satchel. And we tell him enough that he understands what his relay line is being used for. She was already moving toward the wagon. Martha. Ethan's voice stopped her. She turned. He was standing in the middle of his father's barnyard in the full dark of a Texas night, and he looked at her with the expression of a man who was running on very little sleep, and a great deal of something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite hope, but lived somewhere in the territory between them. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said. Whatever Doyle does or doesn't do. Whatever Harmon does. He stopped. Started again. This ranch was worth saving. What you've done here the last 3 days, it was worth it. She looked at him for a moment. The ranch isn't saved yet, she said. Not harshly, just precisely. No, he said. But someone fought for it, and I know that now because of you. The night was very quiet around them. Somewhere a horse shifted in the barn. Somewhere out in the south pasture what was left of the herd moved in the dark. Come on, Martha said. We have work left. She walked to the wagon. After a moment, she heard his boots cross the yard, and he climbed up beside her, and they drove into the dark toward Alderman's office, and whatever was going to happen next, and the lamp on the wagon threw just enough light ahead of them to see the road one stretch at a time, which was, Martha had always believed, exactly as much as any person ever really needed. Roy stood in the barnyard and watched them go. Then he turned and went back to watching the property. Because that was the job. And Roy Jessup, whatever else he was, had never stopped doing his job. Sheriff Alderman was still in his office at 10:30 at night, which told Martha something useful about the man before she'd said a single word to him. A comfortable man went home at 6. A man who stayed in his office until nearly 11, alone with the relay line humming on the wall and a week's worth of paperwork stacked on his desk, was a man who cared about something, even if he'd forgotten how to show it loudly. He looked up when Ethan came through the door, looked past him at Martha, read Ethan's face the way men who'd known each other 20 years read faces. "Sit down," Alderman said before either of them spoke. "Both of you." They sat. Martha put the documents on his desk, all of them. The easements, the Harmon approvals, the blood panels, Briggs's supplemental finding. Her own survey notes, the telegraph from the Federal Land Office on Webb Kinsley. She laid them out in the same order she'd laid them out for Doyle, and she told the same story, but faster this time, tighter, because she knew which parts landed and which parts needed more weight, and she'd already done this once today. Alderman didn't interrupt. He read along as she talked, his eyes moving between her face and the pages, with the deliberate attention of a man who had learned to listen before he spoke and had never entirely stopped. When she finished, the office was very quiet. Alderman picked up the page with Harmon's signature on it, looked at it for a long time. "Jim Harmon," he said, not a question, just the name carried on a slow exhale. "Every application," Martha said. "Every one. And this injunction notice." He picked that up too. "Filed today." "Received today," she said. "Filed sometime in the last 48 hours most likely, the moment Mercer started to sense the federal case moving." Alderman set both pages down. He was a big man, broad through the chest, with a gray mustache, and the careful eyes of someone who'd spent 3 decades watching people make bad decisions and had learned not to be surprised by any of them. He didn't look surprised now. He looked tired, in the specific way of a man who'd just found something in his county that he hadn't wanted to find. "You spoke to Agent Doyle," he said. "This afternoon in El Paso," Martha said. "She's moving on a warrant, but the injunction hearing is in 4 days, and if Harmon gets to it first—" "I know what happens if Harmon gets to it first," Alderman said. He pushed back from his desk and stood up. "I'll put the call through to El Paso right now." Ethan let out a breath beside her. She didn't. "Sheriff," she said. Alderman paused, hand toward the relay. "The injunction notice was sent through a law firm," she said. 4-name letterhead out of San Antonio. "Before you call Doyle, is there anything on that relay line that routes through the county court administration system?" Alderman looked at her steadily. "You're asking if this line is monitored," he said. "I'm asking if it can be," she said. He thought about it for 3 seconds. "It can be," he said, "if someone had access to the county relay junction in the basement of the courthouse." He paused. "Which Harmon's clerk does." The room was very still. "Is there another way to reach Doyle?" Martha asked. Alderman looked at the relay, looked at the door. Something moved across his face, a decision being made quickly by a man who didn't make quick decisions carelessly. "My deputy's brother-in-law runs the telegraph office in Valentine," he said. "He opens at 6 in the morning. He's got a direct federal wire that doesn't touch the county system." He looked at Ethan. "You trust me to hold this until 6? Ethan looked at Martha. Martha looked at Alderman. "Yes," she said. Alderman nodded. "Go home. Get some sleep if you can." He gathered the documents, carefully squared the edges the way someone did when they were treating something with respect. "I'll be in Valentine at 5:30. He reached under his desk and pulled out a lockbox. He put the documents inside it. He locked it and put the key in his vest pocket, separate from his regular keys. "Sheriff," Ethan said. He was standing now. His voice had something in it that didn't come easy. "Thank you." Alderman looked at him. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Get some sleep." They didn't sleep. Martha sat at the kitchen table until 3 in the morning, building a secondary copy of every document from memory and her original notes, working with the fast, sure handwriting of a woman who'd spent 12 years putting evidence on paper in circumstances where the originals might not survive. Ethan sat across from her and drank coffee and didn't pretend to sleep and didn't pretend the pretending would have worked. At some point he said, "What happens to Deke?" Martha kept writing. "That depends on what he told them, and when, and whether Webb Kinsley's people used the information in any provable way." "He's going to claim he didn't know," Ethan said, "that Webb never told him what the company was really doing, that he thought it was just a standard acquisition." "Maybe," Martha said, "and maybe that's even partially true." "Does it matter?" She set her pen down and looked at him across the table. "It matters for the law," she said. "For you, that's a separate question." He nodded slowly, picked up his coffee, put it down without drinking. "My father hired him," he said, "the year after I was born. Deke's been on this property longer than I've been alive." He stopped. "I keep thinking about what I'm supposed to do with that." "You don't have to figure that out tonight," she said. "No," he said. "I reckon not." She picked her pen back up. He sat quietly and let her work, and the kitchen clock moved through 3 and toward 4, and outside the night was absolutely still. Dawn came in hard and fast the way it always did. Martha was at the barn checking Cutter's cinch when she heard the first wagon on the road. She stood straight and listened. Not one wagon, 2, moving at a pace that meant purpose. She walked to the gate. 2 federal wagons came through the property road just as the sun broke the horizon. Agent Doyle was in the first one, riding beside a deputy marshal named Garrett, who was broad and quiet and moved with the economy of a man who did this kind of work regularly. 4 more deputies in the second wagon, all of them in federal identification. Doyle climbed down before the wagon fully stopped. "Alderman reached us at 6:15, she said, coming straight to Martha. "Warrant was signed at 8 last night. We'd been waiting on the judge's signature. Alderman's telegraph confirmed the injunction risk, and the judge authorized immediate execution." She was already moving toward the house. "We need the original documents." "Roy has them," Martha said. "Kitchen." "Harmon," Ethan said from behind her. Doyle glanced back at him over her shoulder. "Federal marshals served Judge Harmon at his home at 5 this morning. He's been relieved of the injunction matter pending investigation." She kept moving. "The injunction hearing is postponed indefinitely." Ethan stopped walking. Martha felt him stop, and she turned and looked at him. He was standing in his barnyard in the early morning, and his face was doing something she hadn't seen it do before. Not relief exactly, because relief implied the danger was past, and it wasn't yet. Something earlier than relief. The first breath after a very long time of not quite breathing. "Come on," she said quietly. He came. Roy had coffee on, and every document spread in perfect order on the kitchen table when they walked in. He'd clearly been up before dawn himself. He looked at Doyle, looked at the deputies, and stepped back to give them room without being asked, the long-practiced movement of a man who knew exactly where the edge of his authority was and respected it. Doyle worked fast. Her deputies photographed everything. One deputy sat at the table with a typewriter he'd brought from the wagon and began transcribing key passages into formal federal documentation. It was efficient and focused, and took 45 minutes that felt like 10. Martha answered every question Doyle asked her. Precisely. Without editorializing. She'd learned early that federal agents respected precision above almost anything, and she gave it to them in every answer. At one point, Doyle looked up from the easement files and said, "This comparative approval timeline analysis. You did this yesterday in the county office." "Yes," Martha said, "in 40 minutes. Approximately." Doyle looked at her for a moment. "What did you do before private land assessment?" "County Records Office," Martha said. 12 years, started as a file clerk. Doyle turned back to the documents. But something in her expression had shifted the professional recognition again, the same thing she'd shown yesterday, sharper this time. "When this is concluded," Doyle said, still reading, "I'd like to have a conversation with you about what you've built here, procedurally, as a methodology." Martha said, "All right," and left it at that. Ethan, sitting at the far end of the table, caught her eye over Roy's head. He said nothing, but his expression said plenty. The first twist came at 9:15. One of Doyle's deputies came through the back door at a fast walk and put a telegraph message on the table in front of Doyle. She read it. Her face didn't change in the way faces didn't change when someone had trained themselves hard against visible reaction. She stood up. "Caleb Mercer," she said to the room, "was not in his San Antonio office this morning when our agents arrived to serve him." Ethan's chair scraped back. "Where is he?" Martha said. "We're working on that," Doyle said. She was already pulling on her jacket. "His administrative assistant says he left the office yesterday afternoon on a property visit. She doesn't have the address." "A property visit," Roy said, and his voice was flat in a way that made everyone in the room look at him. "Roy," Martha said. Roy looked at her. His face was careful, too careful. "What property?" Martha said. "Broken Horn is the only active target property in this county," Roy said slowly. "If he's on a property visit and it's not to one of the ranches that already sold," the room went very quiet. Martha turned to Doyle. "He's coming here," she said. "Or he's already close. He knows the injunction failed. He knows something moved. He's coming to see the damage himself before he runs." Doyle looked at the door, looked at Garrett. "Pull both wagons behind the barn," she said. "Now, everybody inside except 2 men on the north side of the house. Nobody visible from the road." The kitchen became controlled motion deputies moving fast, Roy clearing the table with quiet efficiency, Garrett relaying orders in a low voice at the back door. Ethan stood up. "I stay here," he said to Doyle. It wasn't a question. "You stay," she confirmed. "At the front, in view, normal morning." She looked at him hard. "Can you do that? 3 days ago you'd have doubted that," he said. "But I've been practicing." Doyle actually almost smiled. Martha sat back down at the kitchen table. She opened her notebook to a fresh page. If Mercer came here and she could put his own words on paper in his own voice in front of federal witnesses, that was the one piece of direct evidence that no document could fully replicate. She wrote the date and time at the top of the page. She held her pen, and she waited. Done. Caleb Mercer arrived at Broken Horn at 10:40 in the morning. He drove himself, which was the first surprising thing. A single buggy, no escort, no companion. A man who believed so completely in his own control of this situation that he'd come alone. He was somewhere in his 50s, with the kind of well-fed, well-pressed look of a man who managed problems from a distance and had rarely been close enough to the work to get dirty from it. He stepped down from the buggy with the unhurried ease of someone arriving at a business meeting. Ethan was on the porch. Martha was in the kitchen with the window open, close enough to hear every word. "Mr. Rourke," Mercer said, coming up the yard without being invited. His voice was pleasant. Business warm. The voice of a man who used pleasantness the way other men used fences. "I wanted to come by personally. I understand there may have been some confusion regarding the county easement documentation." "Confusion," Ethan said. Flat. "Legal matters can get complicated," Mercer said. "Paperwork moves in ways that sometimes look more aggressive than they are. I want you to know that the injunction filing was a protective measure purely procedural." "Mr. Mercer." Ethan's voice stopped him. Calm. Absolutely calm. "You want to come up on the porch and have this conversation?" A beat of silence. "That's a kind offer," Mercer said, and he came up the steps. In the kitchen, Martha wrote every word, verbatim. Fast, small handwriting that she could read back perfectly. "I've been thinking about your situation," Mercer said. He settled against the porch railing with the comfort of a man who'd had this conversation many times. "The water issues you've been having, the cattle losses. I want you to know that Southwestern Consolidated has resources, soil restoration, water management infrastructure that could address everything you've been dealing with. The kind of investment that a single property owner simply can't make alone." He paused. "We'd make a fair offer for the property, Ethan. More than fair, given the current state of things." "Given the current state of things," Ethan repeated. The water situation isn't going to improve on its own, Mercer said. The county's hydrological data shows. I know about the fence, Ethan said. Silence. Martha stopped breathing, kept writing. I'm sorry, Mercer said. The fence on my south property line, Ethan said. The one your survey team placed 14 months ago that's been diverting my water basin. I found it 4 days ago. He paused. Actually, she found it. Another silence. Longer. I don't know what you think your survey records show, Mercer said. His pleasant voice had thinned slightly, just slightly, barely enough to notice unless you were listening for it. But any fence on the boundary of those easement corridors would be entirely within the legal parameters of, it's not on the easement corridor, Ethan said. It's 60 yards north of it, on my property, which you know. Mercer was quiet. And the well, Ethan said. The north well. The one your man Webb Kinsley accessed under a surveying license that your company issued him. The one that failed 3 weeks after he was on site. Ethan's voice was steady all the way through. Not raised. Not shaking. Just perfectly, absolutely level. My vet found the chemical signature in 11 of the 12 cattle he examined at that time. Signed a supplemental finding yesterday afternoon. The porch was very still. I think, Mercer said, and now his voice had shifted into something else entirely. Not threatened, not yet, but recalculating fast, the voice of a man revising his understanding of the situation he'd walked into. That you and I should have this conversation with our lawyers present. I think so too, said Agent Doyle, stepping out the front door. She had her federal identification in one hand and the warrant in the other, and she held both of them with the same practiced steadiness that said she had done this before and would do it again. And Caleb Mercer was not the first well-pressed man from San Antonio she had walked a warrant up to. Mercer looked at her, looked at the warrant, looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back at him from behind 12 years of a woman's work and 4 days of fighting to save his father's land, and he didn't say a single word. He didn't need to. They took Mercer in Doyle's first wagon. He went without a scene, which was exactly what Martha had expected. Men like Mercer didn't make scenes. They made calculations. And his calculation from the moment Doyle produced the warrant was that a scene would make things worse, and compliance would give his lawyers more to work with. He was already composing his defense in his head before the wagon left the yard. She could see it in his eyes. She didn't watch him go. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her notebook and a fresh cup of coffee Roy had put in front of her, writing up the complete record of the porch conversation while it was still exact in her memory. She wrote it word for word. She dated it. She signed it. She asked Roy and Ethan to countersign as witnesses to the conversation, and they both did without question. She gave it to Doyle before the first wagon left. Doyle read it, folded it, put it in her inside pocket. You wrote this from memory, she said. I took notes through the kitchen window, Martha said. This is the clean copy. Doyle looked at her one more time with that expression. Then she tipped her head once, a small, precise acknowledgement, and got into the wagon. Oh, the second twist came an hour later, and it came from the last direction any of them expected. Deke Kinsley rode back onto Broken Horn property at noon. He came in from the east, not the main road, picking his way through the pasture the way a man did when he'd decided something and needed to do it before he talked himself out of it. Roy saw him first and came to the kitchen door and said simply, "Deke's back." Ethan was on his feet before Roy finished the sentence. Martha put her hand on the table, not grabbing him, just placing her hand on the table in a way that made him pause. "Let him come in," she said. Ethan stood for a moment with everything he felt about Deke Kinsley visible in his face for just that second. Then he sat back down. Deke came through this kitchen door the way he'd come through it 1,000 times over 9 years. He stopped inside the doorway. He looked at Ethan, he looked at Roy, he looked at Martha, and when he looked at her, his eyes stayed. He'd been riding hard. His face was dirty and tired, and had the particular set of a man who'd made a decision he couldn't take back, and was living with the first 5 minutes of it. "I didn't know about the cattle," he said. His voice was rough. He wasn't looking at Ethan anymore. He was looking at the floor. "Webb told me the water diversion was a standard easement management. He said it was legal. He said it was temporary." He stopped. "I didn't know they'd poisoned the well." The kitchen was silent. "What did you know?" Martha said. Not harsh, not kind, level. Deke swallowed. "I knew the fence wasn't in the right place. Webb told me it was a surveying error that would be corrected. He said it helped their access documentation. He said it was temporary." He said the word again like he was trying to understand how he'd believed it. "And the $10,000 was for," he said it was consulting, information about the property's status, just general information. "What information did you give them?" Martha said. He was quiet for a long time. "Water schedule," he said. "Rotation patterns, when sections of the property went unwalked." He exhaled. "When Ethan's father was too sick to be out checking the lines." The sound Ethan made then was small, almost nothing. But it moved through the kitchen like something much larger. Deke finally looked at him. "I'm sorry, Ethan," he said. His voice broke on the last syllable, and he let it break. He didn't try to manage it. "I thought the ranch was going under. I thought you'd sell before Christmas. I thought—" He stopped. "There's no part of this that holds up, is there?" Ethan looked at him for a long time. "No," he said. "There isn't." Deke nodded. He reached into his jacket and put the folded note on the table, the one from the barn. "I kept it," he said. "Didn't give it back to them. Couldn't." He straightened. "I'll go to Doyle myself. Today. Tell her everything I know about Webb and whoever Webb reports to. Everything." He held Ethan's gaze. "It won't fix it. I know that." "No," Ethan said again. "It won't." But he didn't look away. He sat at his father's kitchen table, and he looked at the man who had betrayed this land, and he didn't look away. Because whatever Deke was, and whatever he'd done, Ethan Rourke was his father's son, and his father had always believed that the most important thing a man could do was witness things clearly. Even the hard things. Especially those. "Go to Doyle," Ethan said. "Tell her everything." Deke picked up his hat from where he'd set it. Walked to the door. Stopped. "Your father built something good here," he said. "That was always true." Then he went. The afternoon was quieter than any afternoon Martha had spent at Broken Horn. Roy made lunch, and nobody talked much, and outside the summer heat peaked, and then very gradually began its slow nightly retreat. At some point Ethan said, "I want to show you something." They walked south. Past the basin, past the line where the grass changed color, past the place where the illegal fence had stood. Past all of it down to where the land tilted gently and the natural water channel ran dry still, but not Martha now understood permanently. Never permanently. Just blocked. He stopped at the fence. Federal deputies had flagged it this morning as evidence bright orange markers on each post. It stood where it had always stood, ugly and deliberate in its wrongness. "When can we take it down?" Ethan said. "Doyle will release it once it's fully cataloged," Martha said. "A week, maybe 2. "And the water? I'd estimate 7 to 10 days after the fence comes down before you see meaningful flow restoration in the basin," she said. "The channel's intact, the gradient's right, the water's there, it just needs the block removed." He was quiet for a moment. "Roy said something to me this morning," he said. "Before Doyle arrived. He said that you'd been working these cases for 12 years, and you'd never lost one. A property you investigated. Never lost one." "Roy doesn't know my full record," she said. "He knows enough," Ethan said. He turned and looked at her. "Is it true?" She considered the honest answer. "I've had cases where I found the evidence and the legal system still failed," she said. 2 of them. Properties that were lost despite everything being documented and correct. She held his gaze. "But I've never walked away from a property and left it worse than I found it. Not once." He looked at her. "This one's not worse," he said. No, she said. It isn't. It's better, he said, because of you. She looked at the fence, at the flagged posts, at the dry channel that was going to run again in 2 weeks. It's better because it was always worth saving, she said. I just helped it prove that. He was quiet for a moment. Martha, he said. She looked at him. He had his hat in his hands. He'd taken it off sometime in the last few minutes, and she hadn't noticed, and he was turning it slowly the way men did when they were trying to say something that didn't have an easy route to the surface. I'd like you to stay, he said. Not as a contractor, not on a temporary assessment basis. He stopped. I want to rebuild the water infrastructure on this ranch right. I want someone managing this land who understands it the way you understand it, the way my father understood it. He paused again. And I want... He stopped. Martha waited. I'm not good at this, he said, saying the thing directly. I've noticed, she said. Something flickered in his face, almost a smile. Not quite. Stay, he said. That's the direct version. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about the next letter from Harlan, the next property, the next failing ranch, the next problem that needed someone to come and see it straight. She thought about 12 years of arriving and leaving, always moving toward the next thing that needed her. She thought about a kitchen table with a lamp on it, and a man who refilled her coffee without being asked, and didn't fill the silence with unnecessary words. I have conditions, she said. He nodded. Waiting. The water infrastructure rebuild comes first, she said. Complete survey of all 4 property lines, all natural channels, all wells. Documented properly and updated every year. She held his gaze. Roy stays. Full authority over livestock management. Agreed, he said. And if Harlan writes me a letter about a property that needs me, you go, he said without hesitation. She looked at him. I go, he said again, and you come back. Martha looked at the dry channel, at the flagged fence posts, at the pale summer sky over a piece of Texas that had never been broken, only blocked. She thought about what it meant to understand a piece of land well enough to know the difference. To know that dried grass wasn't dead grass, that a stopped creek wasn't a dead creek, that a thing could look finished and still be very much alive underneath, waiting for someone to remove whatever was holding it back. All right, she said. Ethan Rourke put his hat back on his head. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. He turned, and they walked back toward the house together across his father's land in the long gold light of a Texas summer afternoon that was finally starting to cool. 3 weeks later, the water ran. It came back the way things came back that had never truly been gone quietly. At first, a slow, dark line moving along the bottom of the channel, and then stronger, finding its old path with the patient certainty of something that knew exactly where it was going. Roy found it at dawn, and stood at the edge of the bank and watched it move and didn't say a word for a full 5 minutes. He went to the house and got Ethan. They stood there together in the early morning while the cattle came down to the water on their own, the way cattle did when they trusted a thing was real, and the sound of it moving was the best sound Broken Horn Ranch had heard in 2 years. Martha was at the survey table when Ethan came back in. She was updating the property maps, the final version accurate to the inch, every water channel, every fence line, every boundary exactly where it was supposed to be. She looked up when he came through the door. His face said everything. Running, she said. Running, he said. She set down her pencil. She looked at the maps spread across the table. His father's old surveys and her new ones side by side, the record of what this land was and what it would be. She picked up the pen and wrote the date in the corner of the new map. Then she looked at Ethan and said, "Let's go see it." They walked out together into the morning, and the land that had been called broken opened up around them, green at its edges, alive at its center, running clear where it had been stopped, and every inch of it exactly what it had always been. Not broken. Never broken. just waiting for someone who understood the difference between a thing that was gone and a thing that had only been blocked, and had the patience, the knowledge, and the will to set it free.